What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Just a quick intro to the video. Every couple weeks, I have a talk about a random topic with two of my friends. The first one being Craig Conley. He is a nutrition and lifestyle coach, and the second one being Eric Bowell, who is a personal trainer. So without further ado, enjoy the video.
All
Cool.
right, shall we jump into the topic
Yeah,
here?
we're about 30 minutes in. So
So lower leg training. Was this
yes,
Big
we
Mike, you
might.
picked this topic.
You did.
Was it for like development, like just developing the lower legs in general, like actual the calf training, or did you have anything else specific other than that you wanted to go over?
Just in general, I mean, you hear all the time, and we can get to these topics in this call. You hear all the time that, like, you can't grow the calves. And so people don't even try training the calves. Similarly, I do a lot of like tibialis anterior work, and you never see anyone ever doing that. So it's more so those two items, but it also kind of ties into the prehab topic that we talked about last time.
hmm That's wild that you do tibialis anterior because I do not do that. I definitely do not. That's
Yeah,
so good though.
I
That's
do it
really,
pretty
really good.
consistently.
That's awesome.
Can I ask you why you do that?
So when I was prepping for the marathon, I was running, and initially it wasn't a strength limitation, it was a cardiovascular fitness limitation with my running, what held me back. So I
hmm
kept running and I got better at that. And then it actually became a strength issue. Not as far as, my quads or anything like that, but as far as my tibialis anterior, because when I would run, I would like push with my foot, and
hmm
then I was like physically unable to pick my foot back up to strike again, like
Right.
in the proper way. And so like when I was running, I was like running like this. I
hmm
almost looked like a reindeer, like a wounded dog or something, right? Like, and so I was telling my friend Sam about this, and he was like, "Oh, I heard about, you know, this exercise, which is real simple. Essentially, you're leaned up against the wall, and all you do is you just pick up your toes like this. It's super duper simple. But if you've never done it before, do 20 reps, 3 sets, and your legs will be fried, your tibialis area, which is pretty wild, right? Because you're not even putting all of your body weight into that movement, like literally
Right.
against the wall. Took maybe 3-ish weeks, and then I've never had that issue since. And I don't really run anymore, definitely not as much as I should. But I've maintained that because if I ever do get back into running, I know I'm gonna be good in that sense.
That's really cool. It makes so much sense. Before I keep going, can you guys hear me chewing?
Uh
No.
no.
Okay, good. I would have been so annoying. I was going to stop. But that makes so much sense. And one of the things that I always coach people on when I'm coaching runners and endurance athletes is like making sure you're going through that full range of motion with your
Mhm.
foot, that plantar and dorsiflexion, because I mean that's the quickest way you cramp up or get some sort of injury in your calf or your like shin splint and things like that.
Hmm.
So the fact that you recognize that is really, really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't recognize it. Somebody recognized it for me, but nevertheless.
Sure. You found out some way. You knew the right people to find out.
Yep. And it says that we
Nice.
only have 10 minutes left on this call, so if it stops us, I'll just send another link if that's all right.
Yeah, let's just set up another one.
Okay.
But okay, so we got some of the backstory. So Mike, since you wanted to bring in the topic, you
Hmm?
want to facilitate, where we start out. And
Wait, can I pose a question?
Yeah, yeah,
yes.
You were saying that working on your tibialis anterior is like important for injury prevention, for like shin splints and stuff like that? Or were you saying something different?
Craig, this is a question for you, I believe.
Was it for me?
I was
Hold
saying,
on.
you were saying, you were like, yeah, I think that's great that you recognize like the importance of training that part of the leg because
Mhm.
it's like important for injury prevention and shin splints. So
Oh, yeah.
strong
Just going through the
tibialis
full.
anterior is like,
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But just going
oh, you're
through
good.
the full range of motion when you're running. So yes,
Oh.
that connects to having a strong tibialis anterior because in Mike's case, his tibialis anterior was not strong enough to allow him to go through that full range of motion. And so whatever's limit,
Yeah.
whether it's ankle mobility or a strength factor, whatever's limiting you from going through that full range of motion should be fixed to allow you to,
Gotcha.
because not going through it would more likely cause injury.
That makes sense. Okay. I wanted to clarify that on my end.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I was not fully paying attention, I guess.
So, okay, so the way that I kind of approach this is, let's see. I guess I just kind of took it as far as lower leg, meaning anything that's knee or below.
Mhm.
And specifically, my interest was in muscles.
Mhm.
Obviously, of the tendon, the ligaments, and the bones. And then I broke it up even further into the front side and the back side of the lower leg, so the anterior and posterior. So the first kind of thing I said was CADS. As far as training, most people are like, oh, you're wasting your time. You shouldn't train your calves. They're not going to get bigger.
Mhm.
I believe this is a misconception. Do you guys agree with that? If so, why? If not, why not?
I think that there's some validity to the idea of you're wasting your time training your calves, but I also disagree. Like I'm like on the fence, I guess. Because I do believe that you can improve your calves, but I think out of any other body part, the calves are more genetically limited
Hmm.
uh, than any other muscle group. And the reason I say that is because it is so hard to force like a meaningful stimulus to like produce the change that you want. And even if you do reach that stimulus, like I still think that genetics plays such like a huge factor in like whether or not they actually grow. They might like change in terms of like density
Mhm.
or whatever, but in terms of like the actual muscle size, I don't think there's like a whole lot you could do with like the actual size.
Why do you believe that muscle is different than most of the other skeletal muscles?
Well, it's one of the few muscles that's like almost constantly working if you're moving around. Like if you're moving around enough throughout the day, right? If you get like 10,000 steps in a day, like that is a lot of repetition on the calves. Move like just propelling the body through motion. And so it's kind of similar to the arms. Like we do a lot of stuff with our arms. Maybe it's not loaded like movements, but we're still moving our arms, contracting, relaxing our muscles constantly, like fine motor skills or even some gross motor skills.
Mhm.
So like it just has such like a crazy high tolerance for workload because it has to.
Yeah, I mean, Craig, what do you think about that? I have some things to say, but I want to hear what you have too.
Yeah. I think that I'm more in the vein that it's a misconception. And for a number of reasons, honestly. One, that there's only when we look at like training calves, we really can only think of, well, if we're talking about the posterior, I didn't even look into the tibialis anterior, so I'm excited to see what you have in that on that, Mike. But we're talking about training posterior and calves. There's like one, maybe two exercises, maybe three, that we resort to or can even think of. Calf raises, seated calf raises.
Donkey calf raises.
Donkey, yeah, there you go. Which is another calf raise. So if we think about any other muscle within our body, if we want to grow our quads, we have lunges, we have squats, we have goblet. Like there's so many different variations of squats that we could, or leg flexion and extension exercises that we could do. Same thing with hamstrings, same thing with chest, same thing with shoulders. There's a lot of, at the end of the day, they're all the same movement pattern, but there's a lot of different variation. Within calves, there's like one or two movements. And so I think from a societal standpoint, people get bored. People don't necessarily want to just resort to that one movement. And so they're like, I mean, I can do all the calf raises in the world. It's not even going to matter. And there's nothing else to choose. So, why would I do it? So I think that the limitation in the exercises is one thing. I think doing exercises incorrectly is another thing. For your walking point, Eric, walking does definitely develop your calves in a certain extent, but it also, the way that we walk puts a lot of stress or emphasis on our Achilles tendon rather than our calves, just because of the quickness of the movement and how, like, we're not really going through a full range of motion when we're walking. And so if we resort to training the calves in a full range of motion, not like we're walking, but like we're, lifting, right? Or trying to grow that muscle, I think you'd see a lot more benefit and a lot more changes in the muscle. So those are two reasons. There's a couple others, but Mike, what'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of split between you two. So I do agree that it's a misconception. We can get into this next, but like Craig said, like improper form, right? Well, I guess I'll just explain what I think is improper form right now since I'm talking about it, which is I see a lot of people doing like bouncing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like you said, with walking, like it's using your Achilles tendon is taking most of that stretch reflex, and you're not actually using your calves. You are, but at that point, I feel like it's almost like an accessory to the movement when it should be the primary mover because calf is literally in the name of the exercise.
Right.
There are exercises beyond like standing calf raises, seated calf raises, donkey calf raises. You could do like single leg calf raises, but like, and even like something like the squat, like your calves are actually have like a very, very small range of motion where they're turned on. When I say turned on, I just mean like contribute, but like big calves don't make a strong power lifter. And there's a million power lifters with like sticks for calves, right? Like, it's not a big thing. So like, even though they're involved in different exercises that you may not realize, for example, lunges, they're not the prime mover. There's a lot like larger muscle groups that are going to take that workload because they can do it a lot easier. Says we have less than 1 minute, so it'll be interesting to see whether this cuts out or not.
You want to just send another one? We got
Where does this recording go, by the way?
I have no idea, to be honest. It's
to the cloud.
Yeah, it's a cloud.
It's the cloud.
Mike, you were saying that the calves or the lower leg are engaged in other movements. They're just not the major movers.
Yep, exactly. And that's why I think that they don't get as much stimulation as other muscle groups. Like, for example, say I am on the route to be the heaviest bench presser in the world. I'm not, but let's say I was. And for whatever reason, I never trained my triceps. My triceps are still going to be probably pretty damn big. You
Right.
would think, at least,
Yeah.
because it's contributing a decent bit to the last portion of the movement.
Mhm.
Whereas the calves, like say in the squat, they're not really ever taking the majority of the load at any point in the lift.
Right.
And then I saw an interesting, I don't know if I want to call it theory, but idea online when searching for this, that I think perhaps Eric will agree with. And the philosophy was that since we're walking so much, the calves are very conditioned, but also that hypertrophy happens early on. And so, like,
Mm.
let's say, like, yeah, like Eric said, like when you're moving your arms and stuff, like you're moving it all the time, but it's not weighted in the same sense that your calves are supporting your body underneath you.
Right.
And so the idea online by this, one random person was that your calves say start at, this is an arbitrary number, but say start at 80% of your potential. And so if you only have 20% of your potential to fulfill, that's
Gotcha.
only 1 to 2 inches on your calves.
Right.
And to most people, that's not a lot. And let's be honest, calves have never won like an Olympia, right? So like
Right.
from like an aesthetic standpoint, perhaps it doesn't make sense to put all your time into calves. But if it's something that you want to prioritize, I think you should prioritize it. And one of those ways is throw it at the beginning of your workout, so you can't do the rest of your training until you get through it. Whereas most people throw it in at the end, almost as an afterthought. Half the time, they're already feeling sick from hitting upper legs, and they're like, forget about it. I'll do it next week.
Right.
So
That's a good point. That's a really good
I
point.
think, yeah, I agree. I 100% agree. I think it's a great point. And I also think, I lost what I was going to say.
it reminds me of last time you're like, my brain's not working.
Dude, it's not.
That's funny. You can do this, Eric. I believe you. Once you remember, just
Go
feel
ahead,
into
Craig.
that.
You were going to say something, and then
That's okay. You were talking about hypertrophy and how, the calves are already somewhat at their peak potential or close to it because of the way we walk. Do you think that's walking? Go for it.
I was going to say not potential as far as strength by any means.
Sure.
I'm not even saying this is an idea of my own.
Sure.
This is just an idea that I read online by somebody else that I wanted to share to hear you
But
guys.
yeah, no, and it makes a lot of sense because of how much they're used. But I think I don't know, there's so many things that come up. Like if we're thinking about type 1 versus type 2, muscle fibers, right? I don't know. I'm assuming that the calves are more type 1 because of how much we use them. And so if we were to put them under a load that's like a heavy type 2 load, like we train them 6 sets of 3, which I've never trained calves that way. But if we were to train them in that different way, do you think that would raise the ceiling of what would the potential would be for hypertrophy? Or what I'm trying to get at right now?
Yeah.
Because they're so often trained in one particular way. If we were to go with even a more standard, like 4 sets of 8, right? You do 4 sets of 8 calf raises at the end of your workout, or beginning in your point. I feel like you can see some changes.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree. That's one of the things that I wrote down was like, when you talk about principles of training, you have progressive overload, time under tension, which would be full range of motion. You have intensity and exercise variety, which Craig, you've hit on. Range of motion increases your time under tension.
Mhm.
Increasing the weight increases your intensity. But the issue that I think you'll run into with most people, if they're not extremely disciplined with it, is reverting back to the form that they're already doing or that they want to do, which is
Right.
that.
Right. The little dolphin tail.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. That's a good point because as it gets heavier, I've done it too. You're just bouncing up and down.
Oh, sorry.
Bless you.
What's that?
Thank you. That was a sneeze.
Man, I think it was just funny because you weren't on camera and you're driving too. That could have been a life or death situation. Goodness. Glad you're okay.
Sorry.
But that's interesting though. Okay. So I agree. They're definitely, I don't know. I was gonna say there's definitely a limitation, but I don't think we call it a limitation. It's just like they're hard. It's just hard.
Yeah.
It's just hard to grab.
So I think one thing to add to your point of if you're not disciplined, you're gonna go back to that bouncing repetition style as opposed to full range of motion, full stretch, full contraction. To add to that, oh my gosh, dude, why can't I complete a thought? Dude, this is so infuriating. Oh my gosh, dude, this is bad. I think my brain's broken. What the heck was I gonna say? Dude.
Craig,
Okay,
can
I'm
you
gonna
read
mute myself and turn my video off.
Yeah, don't turn your video off. So most recently said, they're just hard to grow. Before that, we were talking about essentially program design and changing up, intensity, time under tension, range of motion, which coincide with time under tension, and how changes in that would result in seeing some benefits to your calf. Eric, is anything clicking?
Yes, it clicked halfway through.
There we go.
What I was gonna say is, talk about those training variables, right? Intensity, frequency, that kind of thing. I think because it is such a stubborn muscle to get to grow, specifically grow, because you can get stronger calves pretty quick, I feel like. But to actually see growth there, you have to be very deliberate at how often you train them. And you can't treat it you almost have to give it even more attention than you would a lagging body part. So with a lagging body part, you might spend 2, maybe even 3 sessions out of the week.
Right.
If it's really bad to add in some extra work, some extra frequency throughout the week. But with calves, I think you gotta go for almost every time you're going to the gym, whether that's 3, 4, 5. You kind of have to hit it give it some sort of daily stimulation, and it's got to be something that it's not used to. So one thing that's pretty big and gets a lot of merit in terms of calf training is going super heavy and accentuating that stretch. So a lot of times, you'll see people do low repetitions, 5, maybe up to 8. 8's kind of still lower reps for the calves because they're so used to high reps.
Right.
And then they'll do a pause for that stretch because again, you got to get the full range of motion to your guys' point that you've been saying this the whole call, but you've got to get that, to that lengthened position and then to that shortened position also.
No, that makes sense. And I think that muscle, because of everything that we talked about up to this point, how often they're used, how they are type 1 dominant, they can recover quickly, and so depending on the stimulus you put on them. So I think that it would be feasible to train them more frequently, whether it's every time or whatever, and still see a benefit, not necessarily see a digression. I think I just made up that word, but going backwards.
Regression.
Whatever the opposite of progression is.
Regression.
But yeah, there we go. See regression. But yeah, it's just got to be implemented properly. Mike, what you think?
Yeah, I mean, like with arms, if you start training arms, like, yeah, you get a good pump, but you're not going to have humongous arms after, a month.
Right.
It'll take years of development, and most people just aren't that committed to it.
Right.
Let alone, like we said, with the repetition of just walking around, like if you're taking 5,000 steps a day, that's 2,500 reps on each leg,
Yeah.
on each calf. And then people think that doing 3 sets of 10 once a week is going to change because it's weighted. You know what I mean? Like that's not even
Right.
whatever. Like that's like a fractional percent of
Right.
what they're already doing. What is interesting though is when you're walking, when most people walk, they're not actually going through that full range of motion like you would in a deliberate calf raise.
Mm.
And I've talked to Ryan, the guy who's going to be a physical therapist here in a semester.
Oh yeah.
He walks very very much on his toes, if that makes sense. Because we were hiking this one time, and I'm like, damn, dude, that's the secret to calves. Like just joking around. I'm like, that's the secret to calves. You're walking on your toes. Like I could literally see his calves like flexing with each rep. And I had Dana, take a video of me walking, and I'm not using my calves at all. And I'm like, maybe I need to change the way that I walk. And Ryan told me that actually the way he walks is considered improper form in physical therapy. And they actually try to teach people to walk more like less on their toes, if that makes sense, which I thought was interesting.
Why?
I think he said that it was I could be totally making this up, but I hope that I'm not. I think that he told me that walking on your toes as a kid can be a sign of autism. I think that's what he told me. And then he said also with older people, it makes like balance and stability a little bit more difficult because if you're on an uneven surface or something like that and you're on your toes, there's a lot less contact area there.
Right. That makes sense.
Something anecdotally that I will mention along the same theme of, just one person, which is Ryan with big calves and he walks on his toes, is it seems like you guys maybe have never noticed this, but after I mention this, pay attention and maybe you'll agree with this. It seems like the larger an individual is, the larger their calves are. Now, that could be attributed to a lot of different factors like body fat percentage or just bone structure. But it could also be a part of the fact that they have significantly more load on their calves all the time. And kind of like along this it's not a tangent, but kind of along this line of thinking, the person who mentioned like, oh, your calves are at 80% of their potential, and so that's why they don't grow that much. They actually they didn't recommend calf raises. They actually recommended walking on a treadmill at an incline with a weighted vest.
Yeah.
Yep.
I didn't even think about that, but I do remember times where I'd be walking on a treadmill and like a super high incline, and my calves would be fired up.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that's one thing that I wanted to get to eventually. So I was talking with Andrew at work one day about calves. He's like, dude, I have tried every calf training principle that you can think of. Well, he didn't say all. He gave himself some leeway. He said almost everything he has tried for his calves was not able to grow his calves. Like any sort of training style you could think of, he's probably tried it for his calves, and he said it didn't work. And then we got into the topic of, being overweight for an extended period of time. Because there are two of the other trainers, they used to be like very overweight. and they both have extremely good calves. And we all kind of like talked about it right then and there, and we kind of came to a consensus that like, yes, like your body being forced to work under like an excessive load more than like what the body is like supposed to be able, like your frame, right? Because everybody has like a frame of like what their ideal weight should be, this and that. And if you exceed that, then you get into the space of like, okay, now the calves are really going to have to do some extra work. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this either, but sometimes it's not always the case, but sometimes people who are overweight, they kind of have a different way of walking, like almost like their calves are used a little bit more, like to push off the ground. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed that before.
I haven't noticed that. I need
I've
to
noticed.
do it though.
Just start watching people walk wherever
Yep.
you go. I've noticed different forms. I don't know. Repeat how you said they walk one more time, because I don't know if I've noticed that specifically.
I don't know. I really like, I don't want to be, I'm not trying to be rude or mean or anything,
Sure.
or like talk down about a particular person or group of people. But
Mhm.
it almost kind of looks like there's a slight, like people who, this is really reserved for like people who are really, really overweight. It's almost like a slight waddle where like they have to like
Yeah.
lean all of their weight to one side to get like that push over to the other.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
I think that requires more calf involvement than, someone who's in like a healthier weight range.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have noticed different forms. The waddle is something that's like commonly brought up or talked about. Another one that I sometimes see is people with their foot like internally rotated almost, or externally rotated, one of the two. And they just have, maybe it's not even overweight people. This might segue into a little bit of their topic, but I see it in overweight individuals as well, where there's a less scientific name for it. I can't remember what it is, like pigeon toe and something else, where their foot is like internally rotated or externally rotated. And I feel like that probably has something to do with how their calves develop too when they walk. That's interesting.
Definitely could. Yeah, because you guys ever ankle your feet during your calf training? Like point your toes out, point your toes in, straight.
Mike, do you?
No.
I do. There's like a study that came out pretty early on that suggested that like when you're pigeon toed with your toes out, that it works more the medial gastrocnemius. And then obviously internal, or not internal, but like pointing, inside would then work more so the lateral. But then there was a study that came out after that that said there was no significant difference. So take what you want with it. I know that I've taken time off of calf training, like everybody on the planet. And when I got back into it, I did like just one version for whatever reason. And dude, I think it was this one. And I'm telling you, I only felt soreness for the next couple days on the inside of my calves.
That's weird. I have always thought of the angles like being different. Like I always thought if your toes are out, you're working the outside of your calf. I've always thought that until today, I guess.
We might have to fact check that, but I think it's the medial side of the calves.
No, I've seen the same thing, Mike, where if your toes are out, you work the medial, the inside. But I'm doing it right now as I'm sitting, and I feel it on the outside just as much, if not more. So that is weird, Eric. I don't know.
Yeah, I
not
think
sure.
What the heck?
I think also like there is perhaps some influence on not just what it looks like, but how you do it, if that makes sense. So like,
Yeah,
I've seen two people squat before, or let's just say the same person squat before. And one guy looks like he's squatting good, but he's like, man, I'm having like, this doesn't feel right on my knees.
right.
And then that same guy, it looks like he's squatting the exact same, but now he feels okay.
He feels all right. Yeah.
Dude, I gotta like redo my calf training. That's crazy.
It's never too late to start.
That makes so much more sense though, now that you say that, because I'm like, dude, what the heck? Like the outside of my calves like will not grow. And I always do my calf raises like this.
Hmm.
And I'm like, dude, I gotta spam that more because it's working the outside of my calf, but it's not.
You're gonna
Oh, dude,
wind
I
up
went
with
my
your feet.
whole life thinking the wrong thing.
Wind up with your feet horizontal as you're doing calf
That's
raises.
so messed up.
But
What does it say about me?
honestly, Eric, I'm not surprised. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Shoot, I lost it.
Uh-oh. Eric, you gave him the bug.
Dude, I'm freaking rubbing off on you guys.
You said you're talking about waddling, calf. Oh, I remember in high school, especially during track season, I
Mhm.
was a high jumper, and so I would constantly think that if I had bigger calves, I would do better. I would do better in high jump. So I was doing every single variation of calf raise possible, like every day after practice. It'd be inside, outside, like turn my feet in. I'd go single leg, all of it. And my calf, I think I had bigger calves then than I do now, to be honest. Probably because of the amount of volume I was doing, but I think it was also in part due to the running as well. And so that's something that I looked into, made me think about. Um, Before I go into it, what do you guys think? How do you think running or sprinting impacts your calf development? Because there are sprinters out here with some massive calves, but there are also sprinters with, tiny. So,
I think personally I think sprinting would be a little bit better than distance running
mhm.
for calf development. Because it's definitely been said before that sprinting, like, it's possible to stress the muscles during sprinting in such a way that they actually like respond with a growth response.
Hmm.
Because it's just like something about, fully extending, your limbs with like as much force as possible, to
Mhm.
propel yourself forward. That's a little bit different than sub-maximal effort continuously, because that's what the calves are already used to. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just kind of like continuous movement. So
Are
that's
you
why I say
moving the
sprinting would be a little
camera?
bit.
Are you moving the camera to imitate you running?
Yeah, I'm like, you're like in my.
It said like this. It was like this. That's good. That makes sense, though, Eric. I'm in the same vein. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm gonna take kind of a different angle at it. I mean, I don't want to speak on, whether it works or it doesn't work, because to be honest, I don't know. I don't have personal experience with it
Mhm.
for like a long enough time either. But the angle that I kind of want to take is I think that the size of the calves is largely dependent on where your insertion points are, or the perceived size, I should say.
Ooh.
So, like, not to play victim here, but I have pretty high calf inserts, right? And so if my calves are, say, I don't know how large they are, but let's say they're like 16 inches in diameter.
Mhm.
This isn't diameter, this is circumference. So let's say 16 inches in circumference. Versus somebody who has 16-inch calves in circumference, but they like literally attach what appears to be all the way down at the ankle, then that muscle belly is going to be, even
Right.
though this, the girth of it is the same, the total area is larger. And so I feel like that has a pretty large factor on perceived size.
Yeah.
But going back to the topic of like sprinting, I feel as though longer tendons are actually, even though they may not be aesthetic in the sense of calves, I feel as though they'll be more advantageous in something like sprinting.
Yeah.
And I think I've read something on that, but I don't want to talk out my ass.
No, that makes sense. I think it makes a lot of sense. And your point brings up an area that I think is lost in a lot of spaces aside from bodybuilding and like when you're getting into Olympia conversations and things like that, where you talk about the muscle belly and like the length of muscle and how that impacts the aesthetic of it. And it's so true. Like you look at someone with longer femurs, longer legs, like it is more difficult for their legs to appear, you know, bigger, their butt for sure, like their butt to appear more bigger or more developed simply because of the length of their leg. It's crazy.
Yeah, and also like the analogy that I can give as far as like relative tendon size to like muscle belly length is like if you try to push a door at the hinge, it's a lot more difficult than if you push a door by the doorknob. Like there's a reason why the doorknob is always on the opposite side of the hinge. It's because you have more torque, right? And torque is just force times radius, radius being the length. So if your muscle belly is further from the ankle, that gives you a longer lever arm to move that ankle joint. Whereas if your muscle belly is very long and the tendon's short, now if you take the center of that muscle belly, it's a lot closer to that hinge, being the ankle.
That's interesting. I never thought about the door hinge example. You sounded very much
This
like
part. This part of the conversation is going right over my head. To be honest.
You suck. Mike got into some engineering topics, and I kept up with him until he said torque.
Yeah. Simple, short words for me, please.
No, that is interesting though. I kept up for the most part, and didn't think about that.
Yeah, I mean, just the point that I'm trying to make here is
Is that you're smarter than me?
No.
Is that the point you're trying to make?
The point I'm trying to make
we got it.
Is even though a longer muscle belly may be more desired as far as aesthetics go for calves or biceps or maybe even triceps, from a mechanical advantage perspective, it might be easier for you to get stronger with shorter muscle belly. So there is an advantage to it.
Right.
You can become a freak of strength.
And it just depends on what you want. And that's the age-old question of, you know, do I want to work strength or hypertrophy? You have to make a call. That's interesting. All right. So we have hit a lot on the posterior side. Mike, you said you looked at tibialis anterior and had some details on that. One question I have before you dive in, because I don't want to. It's 11:17 right now. How much time do you guys got?
I got all the time.
45.
It's like 9 o'clock for him, for Mike over there. Eric, you said you got 45 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. So one question that I had as you dive into that side, how does the development of your tibialis anterior in the front of your lower leg contribute to or connect to the posterior side, if at all?
Do you know the answer to that?
No.
Oh, I don't know if I know that, to be honest.
Okay, cool. I was just curious if it came up in your research.
Can I give a
Yeah.
Wait, repeat your question again.
Okay. So the tibialis anterior, I was asking how the development of that and just the front of your lower leg connects or contributes to the development of your posterior, so your gastroc and your soleus.
I wanted to make sure I was going to say the right thing to answer that question. I don't know for certain, but thinking through it, my initial thoughts would be if you're strong in the front, in the anterior aspect of your lower leg, and the muscles function as the way they should, then it's going to tie into like proper functioning around the ankle joint and like kind of, you know, do like a loop back to that backside. So if the front half muscles are strong and they work properly, then the back half will follow.
I agree with that. I think just having the
That's what I would
overall
say.
well-rounded function of those somewhat connected muscles makes sense.
What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they'll follow suit as far as, if you increase the strength of your front lower leg, that means the back lower leg will get stronger. I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with that, but I do agree that it definitely will help for like injury prevention. So like if you're running or walking or whatever, like the front of your leg has to take a load to kind of like slow down your foot
Right.
before it bottoms out. Kind of similar to the calves. I mean, calves aren't going to win you an Olympia, and the front certainly aren't. But is that reason for not hitting them? Like the logic that my friend Sam gave me when he was pitching me on the idea of doing the tibialis anterior raises was, he said, would you only train your quads and not your hamstrings? And I said, no. And he's like, why not? And I was like, well, isn't it obvious? And he's like, well, spit it out then. And he's not that blunt, but I'm kind of just like recalling the conversation.
Sure.
And the premise is like both of you have said, you wanted a well-rounded strength, physique, development, whatever you want to call it, around the joint, right? To support it and to have optimal function. And people have that logic with something like the upper legs, but for whatever reason, nobody thinks about it with the lower legs. And I think part of the reason why people don't think about it with the lower legs is they don't think about the lower legs at all, right? Like they're not hitting calves, so why would they hit tibialis anterior?
Right. That's a good point. That's a really good point. So do you think that from a visual perspective, you already mentioned the injury prevention, which I completely agree with. We talked about, having a well-rounded muscle function around the joints. From a visual perspective, if you're looking at your lower leg from a certain angle, actually, let me backtrack. How much have you seen growth in the front of your lower leg, like visual growth in it from doing these?
I will say that I definitely have more like definition, like halfway up my shin, I can see like a cut, like an angled cut, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And whenever I do calves, I always superset with the front of my lower leg. So I do that probably like 3 times a week. And my pump is way better when I do both sides of the leg, of the lower leg. And they say that, the pump is, chasing the future you. So I believe that it does. I haven't taken a tape measure to it or anything, but I believe that it does. And that was kind of not the backtrack or, go on a tangent or anything, but a question I was meaning to ask earlier when we were talking about like calves, and like Eric was talking about his boss, Andrew, and how he says he's tried almost everything under the sun and his calves just aren't growing. I wonder how much of that is psychological, because like they've done studies where they will literally tell people like, we're giving you steroids, and they're not, but they respond better to training because they actually believe they're taking steroids. So I wonder if on the opposite side of the coin, if people believe that they can't train that their calves aren't growing, that they don't respond to training or whatever, is it almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, like a self-limiting belief that manifests into reality?
Yes, I completely think so. And Eric, this kind of connects back to a coaching point that we were talking about early on in the conversation. Where it was like you can provide everything for the client and set them up the best possible, but if they're not doing the workouts or doing what they need to do, it doesn't matter, right? Similarly, I believe that if they don't believe in the program or believe that it's going to get them results, the results are going to be limited. They may still get some, but the results are definitely going to be limited. Like someone could be doing a overhead press, a deadlift, whatever it is, completely correct. But if they're like, nah, that's not right, or is this really going to work? Either from a, what's the word I'm looking for? The word that describes them sticking to the program.
Adherence.
Adherence, yes. From an adherence standpoint or mental standpoint, whatever it is, the results just are not going to be the same as if someone compared to someone who was like, oh yeah, these deadlifts are great, like I feel great, this program is great. There's something to that for sure. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's something to it.
Does that come down to more than like an effort question? Because if you question it in your mind, you're not going to try as hard.
I think so.
So
yeah.
is it the actual like mind overcoming like because I don't know, when you brought up that example of, if you go into it thinking your calves aren't going to grow and then your calves don't grow as a response, I thought of a different scenario of like, if I go like balls to the wall on my training, but I just like tell myself this is not going to work. I definitely think if I'm doing everything else right, I'm going to see results. Or are you guys arguing for like you'll not see as much as you could have if you were thinking something different?
No, I think you're on the right track because for you, if that was possible, that'd be awesome. But I think for a normal person, it's going to be very difficult for them to go balls to the wall in their training if they don't believe it's going to work. So like you said, I think that mindset connects to the effort that they put into the training for sure. And so Mike, to your point, if you don't think it's going to work, the effort is going to be small or not as much as you could have, and then it's not going to work.
Yep. Yeah, I agree 100%. Like effort and adherence. So it's like twofold. And this one might be controversial, which is what I think Eric was asking clarification on, is I believe that it's triple fold in the sense that psychologically, just mind alone has maybe a little impact. Like forget about like what he said, like, let's just say, and you've already said, it's very hard to give maximal effort if you don't believe in something. But let's say that somebody did give maximal effort. Like, we have the same person duplicated.
Let the record show I'd be able to do it. Even though it's really hard, I'd be able to do it.
Let's just making sure we know that.
That's for the recording. Whoever watches this, they know that I'd be able to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Same person, maximal effort, but one believes that it's going to work and the other person doesn't. Clearly, both of them are going to see results. Or maybe I shouldn't say clearly, but I would assume both of them are going to see results.
Right.
But I do believe that the person who believes in the program is going to have some sort of edge, some sort of like almost untangible edge, if that makes sense, or intangible edge.
Yeah.
That's not something I can quantify or prove, though, so that's more so conspiracy talk, perhaps. But
you think they'd have the same edge if the effort level was the same?
No, I think the one person would still have an edge over the other. Like, assuming their adherence is the same, assuming their intensity is the same, the person who believes in the program is going to see more results despite doing the exact same thing the exact same way.
Dude, that would be like we should do that study.
We should definitely do that study because I agree. I think there's something to it, and in part it might be our passion for training and the science behind this stuff talking, and we might have a bias in that sense, but I do think there is something to it for sure. That'd be really interesting. I don't know how you would test that. You gotta, I don't know, read people's minds.
So, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, Eric, that's your job. Figure out how to read people's minds.
That's my job, you said?
You're the man who can do a program with full effort without believing in it. You got to figure out how to read people's minds now.
I could be one of the
Yeah,
test subjects for sure.
We're gonna make a program for you, Eric, and you got to follow it.
But I feel like the way I'm picturing this working out is like you guys would put me through a program and like watching over like the workouts and stuff, and then afterwards you guys would have me say like not positive affirmations but negative affirmations to
There you
like
go. Yeah.
That's
negate the
psychological.
mentality. But I would be saying the negative, but in my head I'd be like, this is totally gonna work.
Right. Yeah, it'd be hard.
I did want to bring up something else related to lower leg training. So when thinking about the lower leg and how it can affect movement patterns, the squat being like the biggest one. So a lot of times, like I'll be working with people who don't know what a movement pattern is, or like they don't do very many squats or whatever. But typically what I see, I was going to demonstrate it, but I'll just show you with my hands.
Hey,
I feel
Zach,
like
I'm getting a phone call and it called me back
Okay.
to back. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back, bro. You can continue.
Okay. Then there was just two.
I'm the host now.
No, I'm the host.
Oh, it said I'm the host.
Dude, Big Mike, what's up, man?
Oh, Craig's joining again. Oh, Craig's the host.
We're back.
We're back.
Okay.
Craig's back.
Did the whole meeting end once I checked out, or was it?
No.
Okay, cool. Cool. All right, continue. Sorry.
One thing I see a lot is either in a squat pattern, heel lift, weight shift forward. That's like one of the most common.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are quad dominant, so that's not the lower leg. But, and here's the point that I was getting at. I'm a big believer in barefoot shoes. I think barefoot shoes are like extremely beneficial for a lot of things, but kind of to tie into that point of having to work full range of motion for calf training. Most people with regular shoes, there's some sort of heel lift, even if it's slight, which then raises the heel here. And over time, constant weight use of those shoes, it puts your calf in a chronically shortened state. So now you've got tight calves, and more than likely you also have weaker calves too, because they're not, there's this much motion that it's not getting ever.
Right.
So that translates directly to the squat movement pattern where you get that heel lift because the calves are so tight. The weight shift forward could be the same reason, or it could just be natural quad dominance that you see in a lot of people. But I wanted to bring that up because it's definitely important. We're talking about the lower leg and how the body works, because it's all one system. There's individual parts, but it's got to work together as a whole.
Yeah, Eric, that's a great point, and it made me think of the point that Mike brought up earlier with your friend Ryan, I think, who walks on his toes, right? And I worked with a swim coach last year who, dude, was like 6'9", I think, 6'9", 6'10".
No, who are you working with,
Yeah.
LeBron?
He was so tall, man. He was just a youth swim coach, but he swam at a Kenyon college, and the prototypical swimmer build, like super lanky, long arms, relative. I mean, for a 6'9" guy, obviously he had long legs, but they weren't ridiculously long, but long enough to propel him through the water and everything. He was just a swimmer through and through, and he also, for most of his childhood, walked on his toes. And so he started training with us because his youth swim team was training at Future. So he hopped into some of the workouts. The guy could not squat to save his life. And when I mean he couldn't squat, like he could probably drop 3 inches, maybe 4, into what would be a squat position. It was more of a hinge rather than a squat. He could drop 3 or 4 inches, and that was it. And then his heels would start to come up because his calves were so tight from literally what he said was probably 20 years of walking on his toes.
Yeah.
And so I worked with him for a year and a half, and we started out with putting like 25-pound plates under his feet just so he could have some more range of motion. And he eventually got to the point where he was squatting full depth with like 5-pound plates under his feet. And that's when I ended up leaving. But it took like intentional work every single day and him failing a whole lot every single day. That was over a span of a year and a half. And so, yes, it definitely impacts your functionality. It just made me think of the story you were telling, Mike, of him walking on his toes. Something that he did not think about, over 20 years impacted how he could move. Like he couldn't sit down really without leaning to one side, putting a hand back, and then settling back into the seat because he couldn't like squat properly.
Well,
It was wild.
yeah, that is crazy. I've heard of like improper movement patterns. I've heard of like maybe some ankle mobility issues, but I've never heard of like calves being like chronically tight to the point where they can't squat.
Yeah, like he literally, once he got past that 3-4 inch range of motion point, he'd fall backwards or his heels would come up onto his toes and he'd be forwards every single time.
Damn.
It was crazy.
Eric, let me see your shoes. Those don't look like barefoot shoes. Can you talk?
I was muted, but these are Vivo Barefoots.
Viva barefoots.
Vivo Barefoot.
How are they barefoot?
Yeah, I don't see a
Well,
foot. I just see shoes.
oh, ha 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 ha. No, they're super. I take them off, but they're all tied and stuff, so I'm not gonna do that.
They're
But
glued.
actually, I have another pair.
Oh, of course.
So this is a different pair. This is my older pair, but very minimalistic shoe.
Those are cool.
Like very, huh?
Those are cool.
Oh, thanks. A lot of people would disagree with you, but I agree with you. There's like no sole, 0 heel drop, or there's like no heel lift, rather. So I guess, yeah, 0 heel drop. But the biggest thing is there's like very minimal padding between your foot and the ground. And so a lot of things that people say that they notice after wearing barefoot shoes in particular is they say that they feel like they get their natural spring back in their step. So like when they're pushing into the ground, they get like a little bit extra. And that's something that was like one of the first things that I noticed too, was going upstairs. I felt like, it sounds kind of silly, but going upstairs, like I felt more explosive. Like I could push off stronger into each step, and even walking around, like I felt like I was walking faster because I was able to like push off more and more into the ground.
That's pretty cool. That's really cool. Yeah, I think that the way that shoes are set up, the way that our feet are now, definitely contributes to some, whether it's low back pain or certain things ailments that we deal with in everyday life. From a triage standpoint, it definitely wouldn't be the first thing that I would say or recommend to someone to fix. Like if they were not eating properly and had poor posture and weren't working out, I wouldn't be like, hey, go get some new shoes that allow your feet to feel the ground. But I think it would contribute. Eric's like, I don't know, be in my top 3. But I think it would contribute in the long term once they had all those other things down. But is there any other topic or question I want to hit on for lower leg? I do got to get going.
I got 3 quick things.
Let's do it.
Okay. So we talked about kind of like injury prevention as far as working on the front side of the lower leg. And a part of that is not just deceleration, but also change of direction. Because when we refer to the front of the lower leg, we're not just talking about the tibialis anterior. That's what I'm aware of as the largest of that group, but it's not the only one. The other muscles also wrap around the front of the leg, help with inversion and eversion of the foot. And so that's why it's important for injury prevention as well, as like helping you kind of stabilize that foot. If you're, say, landing from a jump, like say like basketball, for example, like you're not always going to land perfectly, right? So having shoes to help you with that ankle support definitely helps, but also perhaps training the front of your lower leg also might help you not roll your ankle as much.
That's one of the questions that I was about to ask. So that makes a lot of sense. So I was wondering how lower leg training would diminish ankle injuries. So that makes sense.
And then another thing is something that Jeff Nippard, are you two familiar with Jeff Nippard? I think Eric's gone.
Yeah, you had to go. Yes, I am. I mean, I like his stuff.
But one of the things that he preaches, not just for calves, but a lot of muscle groups, is what he calls pre-activation sets, which is essentially you go through the full range of motion with minimal weight. And the idea is that you lube the joints, you like actually feel the muscles before you hit a set. And this is something that, you know, helps prime the movement, of course, but I have found helps me a ton as far as just like getting more out of my sets. So that's definitely something I would recommend for somebody who's doing calf training. Have you guys done that?
Like a potentiation type of deal?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Not specifically with calf training, because you know I just don't do that very often. But it's with other things, yes, for sure. And it makes a world of a difference in training. I agree.
Does that count? Do warm-up sets count as like the pre-activation? Does that count? Are you talking about like actually, or like something specific, something different?
I would say yes. A potentiation, it has one definition, but it can be applied in different ways. So I think you just got to find what works best for you, as long as you're staying within the structure. So, for example, a squat, I think that's the easiest one or the one that comes to mind first. You could do warm-up sets. You could sit in the bottom of a squat, warm up your hips, do some glute bridges, all that stuff. But then the actual potentiation exercise could be like a barbell squat jump, or, you know, really quick and light barbell squats if you're going to do something heavy that prime the muscle to move quick, move fast, and fire properly. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And then the last thing I wanted to mention on this call is kind of something that was brought up earlier by Craig, which was, you know, everybody trains calves, you know, 10 to 25 reps. Do you think that increasing the weight would help? So I actually wrote this in my notes, because this is kind of, I'll just skim over it and read it, which is the calves are primarily type 1 muscle fibers, right? So the prevailing idea in the literature right now is if the muscle group is primarily type 1, they may respond better to higher reps. And higher reps, assuming your form is good, would mean less weight, because you don't want to do that bouncing that we talked about. However, one of my teachers at Ohio State was really big into something called the size principle. It's called like the Hyman size principle or the Heisman or something like that. Okay. But the idea is that when you use a muscle group, you use the type 1 muscle fibers first, and then only when their potential is maxed out for that load will you then recruit type 2?
Mm.
And then, like the muscle fibers are different sizes, not just based on type, but also based on development. And the idea is the heavier the weight you use, the more muscle fibers you recruit. And those type 2 muscle fibers aren't really called upon unless the load is very heavy, because the type 1 one take it on first. So that's the theory. So following that logic, I mean, it does make sense to go heavy, assuming you can keep your form good. Well, what do you guys think?
I definitely agree. I think heavy calf training is more ideal than, long endurance sets.
Yeah, I agree too. And I think sometimes the word heavy is misconstrued within lifting in general, because maybe it's comparison, maybe it's, I don't know exactly what it is, but like heavy is a relative term. And so heavy for calf raises is not going to be the same heavy for a bench press, and the same heavy for, a squat.
Yep.
So if you're going
So-
heavy relative to what your heavy is, it doesn't have to be a ton of weight. It's just what you can manageably do with full range of motion that provides that quote unquote heavy stimulus.
Yep, exactly. And when we talk about primarily type 1 muscle fibers for, say, the calves, we're talking, a generality. As far as like most common or among, the human population or whatnot. Something interesting, and I don't want to keep Craig, so this is literally the last thing I'll say. But I've been wanting to share this fact with somebody, and I don't have anybody to talk to about this stuff other than you guys. So I've been holding this fact for like 3-4 years at this point.
Oh my God.
As you train your muscles, the size of the muscle fibers like increase, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so let's take my forearm, for example. Okay. So let's just say I have a muscle that attaches from here to here.
Wait, can you roll your sleeve up?
No, nobody wants to see my face. So let's say you have a muscle that attaches here to here. Obviously, we're ignoring the tendons and everything. But as this muscle, the diameter of this muscle increases, the belly is here, the tendons are here at the attachment point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the only way that those muscle fibers can still fit in that place is your muscles go from this to this. Does that make sense? Like the angle of them changes. Because they're not going to go through the bone, right? And so in order to compensate, they don't bend, but the angle of them changes.
Right.
And that's what causes that hypertrophy effect. Maybe the best example would have been the bicep if I would have done that.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
And so that's referred to in the literature as something called a pennation angle. And we don't have to get into the mechanics of it, but the interesting part that I've really been wanting to share with somebody over the last couple of years is the more hypertrophy you experience in a muscle group, the pennation angle increases, which actually decreases the mechanical efficiency of each fiber. Because instead of them pulling, straight, now they're pulling at an angle. So now you have to do some trigonometry to figure out how much of that force is actually moving the joint. You still get stronger overall.
Sure.
You still get stronger overall because the contribution of, all the muscle fibers getting larger has a larger impact than the increase in the angle decreasing the efficiency of each muscle fiber. But it's something interesting.
So if we were to take,
That is
that's
interesting.
so interesting. If we were to take someone, which it doesn't sound possible, but someone with a 0 degree of pennation angle, right? So their muscle fibers are still straight. Is that
okay?
correct
Yeah.
terminology?
I would
Okay.
180, but yeah, 0, same thing.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, 180. Okay. Yeah, that's correct. So 180-degree apponation angle, and then someone with a raised angle would be.
Hmm.
And they were hypothetically both had the same hypertrophy level, if we want to call it that.
Hmm.
Would the person with 180-degree apponation angle be stronger because they have a higher muscle efficiency? Given everything else was told
Everything else
people,
equal.
yeah.
Everything else equal, they should. And that's why, and this is like me going from what I know to what I think. So I just want to draw that line there.
Sure.
This is why I think that a lot of powerlifters don't look like bodybuilders. They're training for mechanical efficiency. So it does not make sense for their bodies to blow up like bodybuilders and for their pennation angle to increase, because that's actually going to decrease the mechanical efficiency of the muscles.
Man, that's a nugget right there.
That's super interesting.
That's dope. You've been holding on to that for 4 years, Mike?
Yeah, something like that. I just don't like nobody wants to listen to me talk about it for 3 minutes. So,
Dude, I want to listen to you talk about it for more than 3 minutes.
That's a gem. Yeah.
that's all I know about it. But yeah.
He's like, I don't really have anything else. So.
Okay, before we all leave, I actually have a calf workout that I want you guys to try. That I'm
Okay,
more
like
than
that.
likely positive you guys haven't done it before.
Let's do it.
So get a some sort of like wedge. I used a those like steppers that you can like build. There's like different blocks. You put like a stack of blocks on one side, stack of blocks, and then you have that board that goes across.
Yeah.
So I used one of those. You stand something where you can do a calf raise.
Okay.
You do as many repetitions in 20 seconds as you can, and then you take a 10-second rest in the fully stretched position. So your toes are on that wedge, and then your heel's on the floor. Full stretch for 10 seconds. And then you go right back into it. 20 seconds on, 10-second stretch. 20 seconds on, 10-second stretch, and do it for 5 minutes straight.
Like a Tabata?
Yeah.
5 minutes. What is that? 10 rounds?
Yeah. And
my
the
gosh.
reps, like, I know we talked about, full range of motion. You still want to go for full range of motion, but they're quick
Okay.
reps. As many as you can.
And you're guaranteeing my calves will grow 6 inches.
Your calves will do something. I promise you that.
So your calves will do something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds
that's
nasty.
a challenge I'll pose to you guys.
Okay. I'll update on how it goes next call. Yeah, I can already tell it's gonna burn at the very least. It's gonna hurt.
You don't know what my experience was with that?
Please.
I wasn't able. Like full transparency, I was not able to walk for 5 days.
Wait,
That's
what?
Like I couldn't walk with the right. Like I couldn't. My heel could not touch the floor. My calves were so tight. Like
Oh
it
my
was
gosh.
really bad.
Dang. That's wild. That is crazy. All right. Let's pick a topic for the next call and then get on with the Saturday.